Welcome to another episode of Faith, Love, and Therapy, a podcast to encourage and inspire. I'm your host, Jamie Johnson, a therapist working in the field of mental health for the last 10 plus years. And I believe this podcast is God-led and God-inspired. And I am so excited about this episode today, where I am having the opportunity to sit down with and have a conversation through Zoom, like we've all been doing for so long, with Miss Sara, who is in the UK, and talking about the diagnosis of OCD and giving the audience a better picture, I hope by the end of this podcast, a better picture of what OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, actually is, and how Sara is living with OCD. And so I just want to thank you, Sara, for being a part of today's episode, and just to my audience who understands that we talk to a range of individuals. And so their desire to share is important to us, but also their privacy is important to us as well. And so we are respecting Sara's privacy this morning. And but we're still going to have a fantastic dialogue, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you, Sara, for joining me today.
Thank you. It's an absolute privilege, Jamie. Just absolutely thrilled to be here and to share my story.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So let's just start with the beginning. So, well, there's more, the beginning in regards to diagnosis. So around what age were you formally diagnosed, and how did you come to be diagnosed?
I was diagnosed when I was around 22, so my early 20s, which I don't think is necessarily uncommon, particularly for women to be diagnosed with OCD. But I'd actually, now I look back, I realise I'd been living with it since I was 10 years old. But it wasn't until I was 22 that I had a crisis. So I was quite poorly for a couple of weeks. I was off sick from work, and during that time it was actually my boyfriend who persuaded me to go and see my GP, which is the first port of call here in the UK. And once I'd seen my GP, they said that they believed it would be best for me to go on to talking therapy. And it was actually when I was with the therapist that I was diagnosed with OCD, along with generalized anxiety disorder and depression. So I had kind of a triple whammy there of conditions, but it's the OCD which was causing me the most difficulty at that time. And I suppose that's the condition which has been the most problematic and most prevalent in my life. And yes, so I've been living with it. I'm now in my 30s, so I've been living with it for, I would say, over 20 years, from that initial, starting point when I was 10 to then diagnosis, and then, through to where I am today.
Yeah. So from the age of 10 to about 22, what were some of the things that you could share that you started or someone noticed, but you didn't have a name for it yet?
Yeah, I think, really it's me looking back and noticing it, I guess, because mental health wasn't something which was commonly talked about in our family, which I think is common for, a lot of families, sort of particularly in the 90s and early 2000s. But looking back, I actually started when I was 10 with a physical checking as part of my OCD. So perhaps it would be worth just explaining that a little bit more. So with OCD, there is the obsession, which is often an unwanted thought or an intrusive thought, or this feeling that something terrible is going to happen. And then you have the C part of OCD, the compulsion, which is something that you do to try and minimize that anxiety, and in your head to try and minimize the possibility of that actually happening. So for me, when I was 10, The OCD was triggered because I'd accidentally caught part of a horror film or horror movie, and I was convinced that this monster was going to come and sort of, you know, kill me in my sleep. And so I would have to do a physical check of, you know, check behind the door, check under the bed, check the window, and check sort of everything. And the part of the problem with OCD is with your compulsions and your rituals. Often if you don't do something in the correct way or in a specific order, you have to start again, because it has to, you know, OCD is all about, you know, trying to control and trying to prevent, you know, these terrible things from happening. And so, yes, I would do all this checking. And that was really the first time, looking back, that I can remember actually experiencing those symptoms. And with OCD as well, you know, you have the initial obsession, which for me was, oh my goodness, this horrible monster's going to come and, you know, hurt me in some way. Then it was the compulsion of, well, if I do this, then actually that's not going to happen. But the problem is, by doing that compulsion, you've reinforced the idea that that obsession is a possibility, when in actual fact it's not. So this is where the cycle comes in with OCD, because you then become anxious again, you have the obsessive thought again, and then you do the compulsion to try and reduce the anxiety, which reinforces it, and it's really this vicious circle. So that was when I was 10. I would say with the OCD, between 10 and 22, it was during stressful points in my life that it really cropped up. And so the next time I can kind of remember it happening was when I was around 15, 16. And in the UK, that's when we do our GCSE exams. Yeah, one of our important sets of exams.
Okay.
And yeah, during that time, it manifested itself more as an intrusive thought and in terms of quite a taboo thought. So when I say taboo, you know, they're obviously topics that are really difficult to talk about. So I'm not sure that I would want to necessarily say what that taboo thought was to everyone listening. But for anyone who has experienced OCD, or if anyone goes and reads about OCD after listening to this episode, then you will probably get an understanding of what some of those themes are. I would just say that it did have a connection to religion. And essentially, in terms of my checking at that time, it became my checking sort of compulsion. Sorry, not my checking compulsion. My compulsion was that I had to repeat a specific prayer in a specific way in order to lessen the anxiety that the thought had brought about. So this is another thing with OCD. There are so many different types, and it affects people in so many different ways. And what I was told by my therapist is that with intrusive thoughts, everyone has them. We've all had a really weird thought. The one she used was, you know, when you see a tiny kitten and you just want to kind of squeeze it to death, and it's really weird, but it's kind of like that thought. But the problem is, when you have OCD, those sort of intrusive thoughts that everyone experiences, you actually believe they reflect on your personality or reflect on you in a way which, you know, means you're a bad person, or you're going to come to some harm, or your family are going to come to some harm. And that's where really it can obviously be quite a debilitating condition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's good that you say that we all have intrusive thoughts, but it's but there's a difference. There's a difference when there's a diagnosis of OCD. And so that kind of leads me to the thought of, or the discussion about misconceptions about OCD, because I hear it often, where some, individuals will just kind of joke and say, oh, that's my OCD. And in my brain, I'm like, no, where they'll just say, I have to be really clean. It's different. It's just not, I like to clean. There's a different element of that. And so could you share some of the things that you hear, or some of the misconceptions that you've identified or seen with the diagnosis of OCD versus how people are just kind of just using it to describe maybe strong conviction or something that really they're really intense about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that first thing you've mentioned, Jamie, is probably one of the things we hear all the time about cleanliness. Oh, I like things to be tidy. I like things to be neat, orderly, and clean. I've got OCD. And it's like, oh, you can't put that in that place because, it's sort of my OCD. And there is a huge difference because, many of us like to be clean, tidy, orderly, and neat.
Yes.
But the majority of us probably don't think that if we don't do our cleaning or order things in a certain way, that some terrible harm is going to befall us. And that
Right.
really is the difference. That essentially, with OCD, people using it to describe themselves as an adjective, that's really not what OCD is. It's a complex mental health condition which can cost people their lives. You putting your cup in the cupboard in a different way is not going to be the same as someone believing that if they don't, for example, put their cups in the cupboard with the handles facing the right way, that their child might die. And that's what we're talking about here, this huge difference between liking things to be a certain way and believing that if things don't happen in a certain way, then something dreadful and awful is going to happen. So the cleanliness one is a huge one. Similarly, the OCD is just washing your hands. There are many different types of OCD, and hand washing can obviously be one of those compulsions, the rituals mentioned earlier. But actually, the type of OCD that I have now, I mentioned earlier about sort of physical checking and that being part of my compulsion. But now my OCD has taken the form where I will mentally check. So I now have a form of OCD called pure OCD, where it is all of the compulsions are internalized, they're all in your mind. And so the idea that it's just hand washing, I say just hand washing, obviously for people who have that as their compulsion, I don't mean to diminish that, because that's extremely important for them as part of their cycle. But the idea that that is the only thing that comprises OCD is just completely wrong. And I think most people, when they say these things, in common parlance, OCD, as I said earlier, it has just become an adjective. And I do think it's a lack of education rather than any particular malice, which is why I wanted to come onto the podcast today, because the more that people understand that this is a really life-changing, life-impacting and life-threatening condition, the less people will be saying, oh, I'm a bit OCD. You can't just be a bit OCD, it consumes your life. And also I think the other thing is, just as an example, the other day I was at the train station, and obviously COVID has been really problematic for people who have OCD, and part of their compulsions are cleanliness, hand washing. And there was a family, and the mom was clearly quite concerned about her children touching anything in the railway station, like the handrail coming down the steps.
Mm-hmm.
And the grandmother, or I assume it was the grandmother, whoever was with them, said, "Oh, don't keep saying that, you'll give them OCD."
Mm.
And it was just like, oh, I really want to go and say, actually, you know, I guess technically it could be a stress trigger which does cause OCD, but actually OCD is not just about cleanliness. And that was just one example of many. And I think as a person living with OCD, it's really difficult in those moments to speak up and say, actually, you're not really defining this in the correct way.
Yeah.
Because, you know, OCD is an anxiety disorder, and most of us, you know, will feel anxious. So going in and saying to someone you're wrong, you know, in that kind of situation, you know, would be even more problematic. So I think that's why this sort of, you know, why generally education pieces, podcasts, blogs, conferences, whatever it may be, are so important, because in those moments we can often feel as sufferers that we're powerless to say, oh, hang on, this isn't right. But the more we can do things like this, the more that message can filter down gradually, the better things will become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important to educate individuals, groups, as many people as possible, that so that there's an understanding, but also that there's compassion, versus this idea that they're going to see someone that they've seen like in the movies, you know, that is washing their hands 5,000 times and flipping the lights, and that's that. Then they're going to know that that person has OCD. Where there's no compassion for, as you have stated, the struggle is mental. It's internal, for you. And so there's no clear understanding. There's one picture of what this is, and it's so much bigger. And you mentioned 4 types of OCD. Are you comfortable with kind of educating us a little bit on the 4 types of OCD?
Yes, so I mean there are many types of OCD. I should just say, so there are, I'm not even sure how many there are in total, but the sort of types that have affected me have been obviously the sort of the physical checking, often rumination, with the type I mentioned previously.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of all of the mental checking. I mean, there are all sorts of things that people experience. So intrusive thoughts generally, which cause the OCD, can come, from so many places. And I will say I'm not an expert on this entirely. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's great if people can go and read up about these separately, but just some of the ones that come to my mind. Intrusive thoughts can, as I mentioned earlier, they can feature religion, they can be blasphemous thoughts, which is a particular struggle for those of us with faith. There can be sexually taboo thoughts. There can be thoughts of harm, so thoughts that you might harm yourself or another person. Just trying to think of all of the other types. There are so many, Jamie, so many.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you don't have to name them all, just kind of where you, just the things that, as you're doing, what you recall or have experienced, or are familiar with. Trust me, I don't want to put you on the spot. Even as a therapist, I have to go through the book and like, wait a minute, this sounds, let me find which one this is. So yes, absolutely. But you did mention the ones that are focused on religion, which
yes,
it's particularly difficult for those of us that are people of faith. And so your blog is called Faith, Me, and OCD. And so tell me a little bit about that faith journey, one that has been kind of a struggle with OCD, but how that evolved into a blog.
Sure. I should have said before as well, Jamie, sorry, just going back to the previous question, that all of these intrusive thoughts, they're usually the things which are most against our character. So these are obviously unwanted thoughts, and that's why there's some of these larger topics like religion, like sexuality, harm. So I just wanted to say that as well before going onto my blog. So this really came about because I felt that, particularly with some of these taboo topics, it's really difficult to talk about them. And as a person of faith, I felt as if, I was just this awful person because I was having these unwanted, intrusive thoughts. But I thought it must mean I am this terrible person, and it goes against all of my values, all of the things that I've grown up with as a person of faith. I should just say I've been a Christian, so I've been going to church for as long as I can remember. So, but actually the OCD did cause me to partially have some distance from God. I think because of the fear of, I am this terrible person, I'm not worthy of the love of God. And so having gone through my treatments, which involve medication and therapy, as I think I mentioned before, I started to come back to my faith. And actually last year I went on a prayer retreat, and it was an online retreat. It was kind of a retreat in working life. And my guide, I was really fortunate, he kept reiterating to me and saying, God loves you, God loves you, God knows what you're going through, God loves you, it's okay. And I think for so long I'd focused on the sort of fear element of I must be this terrible person, I'm thinking these things, these are going against my religion, I can't therefore be a Christian. But actually what I wasn't focusing on was the message of love, which is in the Bible. And that really was a turning point for me, I think, because I realized that, okay, well, first of all, these thoughts are, these are things I don't want to think. This is a mental health condition. And secondly, it was, okay, well, actually God is love. And so I, can have this relationship with God again. And actually, in those times where I was really ill, often God was the only person I could call out to. I mean, God was the only one who was there, who I could talk to, and who I knew would understand. And so when I came to write my blog, I found there were there's loads of great resources about OCD, obviously loads of different blogs, but I wanted a space for Christians to be able to, to sort of know that they weren't alone. And having gone what I'd been through, of that feeling I'm not worthy of God's love, I can't be a very good Christian, I'm, a sinner, which, we, we all are, but, no one's perfect. But it was just having that space where people could could share their thoughts, and I could really give some hope as well. I think often in my posts I include some scripture verses, just to reiterate my point, or to give some hope so that people know they're not alone. And that's really how the blog came about. It was because I felt, God was calling me to share my experience, as painful and as difficult as it had been. And there were times I doubted. I was like, do I really want to put all of this out there on the internet?
Right.
What will people think? But you have to let go and let God at the end of the day, and you have to trust that if I can help someone else through this blog, then that's such a privilege, just by sharing my experience. And that's really why I started it up, I guess, just to try and help others, and to let them know there was a space that if they wanted to talk about their faith, and how that's interacted with their OCD, then they can, and just so that they can hear from my journey, really, if it helps in any way.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful. And I love your blog. And sometimes I have to get caught up on your on your blog because of life. But what I do love about it is, yes, you do include scripture, but you can hear the desire to make it a safe space, if that makes sense. Just the way that you communicate your own story and God's love, it feels, I'm very visual. So it feels like a nest, where, mama bird can kind of have those that are, need something, but support them in that kind of safety of a nest. And it does feel very, very warm in how you talk about your experiences. And it's almost, and it's such an invitation to those who are struggling to enter the nest of that safe place, and get resources, but also not feel like they're by themselves. And so I'm definitely going to include the link for your blog so that individuals can read and really see what I'm talking about. And so that they can follow and subscribe, because I think it's a resource that, like you said, is different. There's resources that kind of are educational, just talks about this is what it is, the points,
Yeah.
and this is how you treat it. But then the point of view and the perspective that you come from is, this is my life with this. This is how I live with this. And God is, walking with me through all of this.
Yeah.
And so it's just such a very, it's peaceful. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's just very supportive and peaceful, and it feels very warm. And so it's a great resource. I find it to be a really, really great resource for people that don't even have OCD. And even if you're not in the field, like I'm in the field, if you know someone who's struggling with OCD, or maybe you don't know because they're not ready to share, but this blog does give insight on a lot of different topics, and it does sound, it brings the Father nearer to the situation, or us nearer to the Father in the dialogue that you have and what you write. And I may not be saying this right, but I'm hoping it's coming across clear, that there's just this connection that you make in your writing. So I applaud that, and I think it's necessary. Do you find that your faith, because I remember you saying there were times where, the Father is really the only one that you could call on. And so in those moments, does it feel reassuring? Is there ever the moment that it doesn't feel like it's working? Because I always want to tie into those who are struggling with connecting. Does it ever feel like that?
I think, that's such an interesting question. I mean, there have there have been times where things have been really difficult, and just a trigger warning here for suicide for anyone who that might be a problem for. I did get to a point where I wrote a series of notes, and I had been calling out to God in the days before that. But I also believe, Jamie, that God works through people, and I am so fortunate to have a really close friend who understands OCD, and she had said to me, if you ever get to that point, you need to call the crisis team, which is what we have here in the UK when you're going through a crisis. Each county or sort of health trust has their own crisis team. And so even though in those moments it wasn't necessarily apparent to me that God was there, I know that God had worked through my friend, who I should say actually she is a person of faith, but she's Muslim, so she's not Christian. Okay. But I believe God was working through her and several other people around me, and working through the crisis team to get me to the point where I am today, where I'm in recovery. Yeah. So I think that's something else I would say to people is, sometimes we pray or we cry out and we feel that God isn't listening. I think that's a common theme in the Psalms as well. You see that so often. Yes. And yet, actually, he is. It might not be that things turn out the way you expect them to, but actually God's got a greater plan. God obviously knows what's going on. Yeah. And so, even in those moments when you feel truly alone, you are never alone, because God is working through people and working in you in so many different ways that, there's no reason to feel that, well, I say there's no reason to feel that God isn't there. I don't want to diminish anyone's feelings, but, you can feel that way, but God is there, essentially, and God is present, and God is with you throughout those struggles and through all the difficulties you face. And yeah, as I said earlier, for so long I was afraid, or thinking, sort of the fear of the Lord, but actually God is love, and that's really the message I want Christians who are living with OCD, and actually anyone who isn't a Christian as well, is that love will bring you through what you're going through. And so I would say you may feel as if God isn't there, but he completely is. You're not on your journey alone. Yeah. I love that. And I asked that question. I know it's a challenging question for us as believers, but I think the transparency of the journey is what helps others, because you may be in recovery, but if there's someone who's at that place that's like, I've been struggling with this for years and I feel no relief. I don't feel like God hears my prayers, or I don't feel like I'm working through this well, that they're that part of the journey. And sometimes, being able to look back and encourage someone to say, I know that it's dark, but if you keep walking and if you keep calling on the Father, he's bringing you through that particular season. Because we often, talk about the mountaintop experience, but it's the valley experience where God is just as present, but we don't hear the same way. And so sometimes I think some of us have to, from that mountaintop place, be able to say, hey, keep coming. Yeah. You're gonna come out of that. And so we're able to say that. I think we're able to say that so from an authentic place, when we're able to say it was not always
rainbows and butterflies, but
Yeah.
there were severe dark moments where I wasn't sure. And yet still his love saw me through that particular season. And so I thank you for sharing. I know this is a personal journey, but I appreciate your transparency because I don't know. I think when we're in that place of recovery and healing, I was talking to a friend the other day. Sometimes you just want to take other people with you. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't want you to stay back there. So I want you to hear, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and know that on the other side of the bad and the ugly, there's a season of good. There's not perfection, but it does get better. And so I thank you for sharing that, because that's not easy to talk about. I do think that, and I love your spirit and your enthusiasm for like loving people, because I can tell that is there. There was another question about your faith and OCD, and I think you kind of touched on it, but was there ever a time where, because I've heard this from others too, where they say, well, God, why wouldn't you just heal me from this? Why wouldn't you just stop this? If it's such a struggle for me, why can't you just take this away? That's common. I think I hear it in sessions, and I'm often thinking, well, I can't answer that. But it happens all the time. And I'm like, God is great. He loves, but I don't have that answer. But has that ever, crossed your mind too on your journey?
I think it has. It's hard now looking back because I'm in such a relatively positive place. But I would say, we look at the story of Job and, everything that Job went through, and, there's that sort of, why is this happening to me? And yeah, sort of why won't you take this from me? And obviously we have that in the scripture with Jesus as well, saying that, don't we?
Yes.
Take this cup from me. And so it's a really powerful, and I think a sort of natural and a human emotion to say, you have this power, God, why won't you just take this from me? But I mean, it's wow. I mean, the question of suffering is such a huge question that people have wrestled with for centuries. But I think, just coming from my personal experience, looking back now, I actually believe, I went through all of this so that I could, start my blog and help others who were going through the same thing, and give them, some hope, and give them, that peace, well, or at least direct them to that peace that comes only from God. And so I do feel, I'm not sure if I ever felt, God, why won't you just take this from me?
Mm-hmm.
But I did feel sort of, why is this happening to me? And as I said, I think both of those are really, valid and natural human responses to suffering. And yeah, I really do believe that, as you said, God is great. There is always a bigger plan than we can even imagine as human beings. It's mystery to us, but ultimately it's part of something bigger. And as I said, for me, I feel at this point in time, at least, that something bigger was being able to share my story, so that people know that they aren't alone. And I feel that is actually a really privileged position to be in, as difficult as it can be to share that story sometimes. I've had people share their own stories with me in return, and that is such an honor and a privilege. And you know, if I can just make one tiny bit of difference, then, you know, that makes me immensely happy. And I believe that is what God is helping me to do. And I also think, from a sort of personal perspective, actually going on this journey has helped me to heal so many other things that I feel it's been almost like a wake-up call from God. That my most recent crisis was last September. And I feel, well, I say last September, I had 2 crises within the space of 2 weeks. So that was a particularly difficult period. But I feel it was God's wake-up call saying, come on, Sarah, you know, let's, you know, come closer, let's heal this, and let's have, you know, the life and the abundance that, you know, you are supposed to have. And so I feel that in the bigger picture as well, that this whole journey, I feel so much more at peace now. I can't even describe, and, you know, have such a you know, a more prayerful life. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the, yeah, it's difficult, but there is a positive reason for it.
Absolutely. I love that because I think that's absolutely true. That there is, you know, he uses everything. He uses everything. There's nothing wasted. And so to be able to use your experience to help others, but then also it has opened the door to greater healing for you, I think is amazing. It's amazing. And so we're coming to the end. I do want to ask kind of, I guess, two sides of the same coin. What would you say to individuals that are newly diagnosed, that are trying to figure out, okay, what is this life going to be like? How do I live with this? And then also, how do we support those who have been diagnosed with OCD?
Really good questions, Jamie. So I would say, from my personal experience, anyone who's sort of newly diagnosed, please do get professional treatment first and foremost. I'm a big believer in prayer, but I also believe, as I said earlier, that God works through humans, through others. And so please do seek professional mental health support, medication if necessary. For OCD, ERP is usually, I believe, the therapy which is most effective. But again, speak to a mental health professional about that. And just as you begin that journey, take it one step at a time. You know, we wish we had a magic wand, or as we said earlier, we wish God would just take it away, but actually it's going to take time to get yourself to a place where you know, you're feeling more like yourself again. Remember that, you know, having a mental health illness does not make you weak. It does not make you a bad person or any of those things, you know, that unfortunately society may have told you, or someone close to you may have told you in the past. That actually, you know, it takes a lot of strength to go through a journey such as this. And also, as I said earlier, to know that you're not alone. There are people out there who want to support. God is walking with you all the time. And also, I think, just to sort of, for people who are newly diagnosed, to end with the point that you can recover. I think it's really important when you're first at diagnosis and you're poorly and you've probably managed this for years. You know, most people with OCD manage for years without getting a diagnosis because these intrusive thoughts are so taboo and things that they feel they can't talk about at all. So just to say that, you know, you may have held all of this pain for so many years, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and, you know, take it step by step and you will get there. And again, you know, nothing's ever going to be perfect. You know, there are ups and downs on the journey. But you can get to a place where you enjoy your life again, and where the OCD is, just a mild annoyance. It's a secondary thing rather than the the sort of thing which dictates your life.
Yeah.
With regards to the second part of the question, so for people who are supporting those who are newly diagnosed, first and foremost, just be there. When I was struggling, people were saying, what can I do? What can I do to help? And often my parents, I thank God for them, but they would be doing all the practical things like around the house. But which was great, but it was the thing they could, that was the only thing they could think of doing to help me. And actually just having someone sit with you, I think is really important. It's really hard for loved ones as well, because part of my checking compulsion is reassurance seeking. So I will say, so when I was ill last year, I was thinking that I had done something terrible in the past. So I would keep saying to my fiance, but this didn't really happen, did it? But this didn't really happen. Oh, what does this mean? And so as a loved one, you can be there thinking, right, I need to reassure them. But actually that perpetuates the cycle. So that isn't helpful. It's better to try and change the subject. As unnatural and as difficult as that feels, I would say if you can not reassure where possible, that is going to help people in the long run. Yes, please do make sure that your loved one seeks professional treatment, mental health treatment, support, and obviously pray for them. And I think as well, just support them step by step. Don't expect too much from them. Don't expect that this is going to be an overnight process, because it really isn't. But just be there as you would for any loved one, whether they had a mental health condition or not. Be there for them on the days when things aren't so good, because regardless of our mental health, we all have good days, bad days, days when things really don't go as planned, and we're there to support our loved ones. It's the same with an OCD diagnosis, just let them know they're there. And what helped for me as well, sorry, one final point, Jamie, I know we're running out of time.
Take your time.
One final point is, for me, when I was really poorly, I essentially forgot who I was, because I was just believing I was this awful person that the OCD was telling me I was, because I had these really horrible unwanted intrusive thoughts. And so I thought I was all sort of, think of the most terrible things you can think a person to be. That's actually what I thought about myself. Something my fiance did was wrote me a list of all the people who loved me, and reminded me of all the things I had done for people over the years, all of the friendships I had, all the lovely family memories. And that really helped me to bring me back to myself a bit, and to think, actually, I'm not who the OCD is telling me I am. This terrible thing didn't happen, or these terrible things aren't going to happen. It's, my mind's way of trying to control things in a really strange way. But actually, I'm still me. And I think for people with OCD, often you feel like, one of the things people say is, I'm going crazy, and actually just keep in mind that you are still you. And if you have a loved one who can remind you of all the things that you are, and all the things that you are to other people, and all the things that God loves about you as well, then that is going to help you on your journey. And again, just to sort of as a final point, say you can recover. It is possible, and you can live the life that you were meant to live. So yeah, please keep that hope in your heart. It won't be this way forever.
I love that. that's a perfect way to bring this all together. I know that you can, those that are listening that may be struggling with OCD or living with OCD, that may be wondering if they're diagnosed, if they have OCD, or you're supporting someone with OCD, there are resources available. Please seek professional treatment, as Sara is saying. You can look for resources on the International OCD Foundation website, but also, Sara, if you can let the audience know where to find your blog, that would be great. Or where to connect with you.
Absolutely. So I am on Instagram, and so my handle on Instagram is Faith Me and OCD, and then my blog is faithmeocd.wordpress.com, so without the and in the URL. But yes, if you go to my Instagram, then you will be able to see a link on my profile to my latest blog post. And yes, there are some resources there just for anyone in the UK, if I can mention as well, yes. Jamie, some of the sites which have helped me, OCD Action, OCD UK, and the Mind website. All three of those were really helpful, and actually I think they would probably be useful wherever you are in the world, but they obviously have a UK focus.
Okay.
So yes, just to mention those as well for anyone who's struggling. And I also have an email address, which is faithmeandocd@gmail.com. So if anyone wanted to email, whether that's to share their story or ask me to pray for them, I'm more than happy to interact with people on email as well.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for being now a part of the Faith, Love, and Therapy podcast family. I think this has been one of my favorite episodes. The conversations with people that are living with a diagnosis and can pour into others are extremely exciting for me. And I love that you have taken the time this morning. It's morning for me. It's not morning for you. But that you take the time to be with us here on Faith, Love, and Therapy. And I hope at some point I will be able to talk with you again a little bit more, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. And just a huge thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I've never done a podcast before, so
you did great.
Thank you. So yes, as I said, if anyone wants to connect, they can, but I'm more than happy to talk again. And yes, just to anyone who's struggling, just remember you're not alone. And God bless you all.
Yes, thank you. And everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Faith, Love, and Therapy. I will see you next time.